continues here. It is such a hot day today. We walked this morning, as is our tradition, over to the Capitol building and could barely make it back. Hannah Grace was asking if I would carry her back. Of course, that wasn't going to happen in 90-degree heat, but it's okay. It's all part of the experience. We continue here, and Chris Hajec is our first guest, Director of Litigation at Immigration Reform Law Institute. Hey, Chris, welcome to the Schilling Show.
Thank you, Rob. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you with us. And I want to start out by telling people a little bit about your work and what you do, because many people are not familiar with immigration law and they don't quite understand what that means.
Well, a lot of what we do is is help defend President Trump when he tries to enforce immigration law much more than it has been enforced by prior administrations.
You know, this is what I think is so frustrating to most of the people, is that the president ran on the issue of illegal immigration. He was willing to speak out about it more forcefully than any candidate I can remember in my own history, having watched this since the Reagan days. And I think that got most people's attention immediately when he was talking about this. Like, well, this guy's saying what we've been thinking all the way along. As soon as he gets in and he starts doing some things that are substantive, the courts get involved. And this is what frustrates people, is the president is operating within the law and they find some sympathetic judge on the left who says, I'm going to thwart that.
That is exactly what happened. The Democrats were attempting government by lawsuit. I mean, they would have lawyers lining up at airports to meet people and see, and see if they could be plaintiffs and to challenge the travel restrictions that he instituted from a number of countries that were very unstable and didn't have good vetting procedures in place. And eventually the Supreme Court overruled it and upheld the travel order. And our organization wrote an amicus brief in those cases.
You know, as we look at that, Chris Hajec, and I think all of us get really frustrated, and to hear you describe it as the Democrats basically lawyering up and trying to, just solicit people getting off airplanes at airports. I mean, this is subversive. I would almost call it treasonous to the president's efforts to maintain the rule of law in the country and to keep people safe as he could through the enforcement of immigration. So when you have a political party that is looking to disrupt at that level, I don't even know how you handle that. I mean, your hands must have been full, but how do you stay on top of this? Because they can send lawyers out to airports or any other places to the border and just do this forever.
They can, and but they rely on having their own judges in, and they carefully pick which districts to sue in, and it all seemed to go well for them at first, but they don't have the Supreme Court, and they're losing even more of it as we speak. Which is a great thing. I mean, and I thought it was very important to explain to the court, the circuit courts and especially the Supreme Court, that we are a sovereign nation, and the law is, and it always has been understood to be, that we can exclude people, foreigners, from coming into the country for whatever reason we might have. They can't force themselves into the country through lawsuits. And it was really the purpose of the activist lawyers in these cases to reverse that and make it and take a big chunk out of American independence as a nation.
Chris Hajec, what was the legal basis of them? Were they trying to say that anybody who wants to come here actually has a right to enter the United States at their discretion rather than ours? I don't understand what their legal argument was.
Their legal argument, that they didn't challenge the idea that we could stop anybody for any reason directly, but they tried to do an end run, and they found Americans who said that they felt religiously excluded and discriminated against because the people Trump was trying to stop were from predominantly Muslim countries. And so they sued, alleging religious discrimination, which violates the Constitution if it's against Americans. But if that were allowed to succeed, American members of ISIS, and there probably are some, would be able to sue to make sure people from, who are in ISIS can come, or that we shouldn't be attacking and trying to kill ISIS overseas. They could sue to join the war on ISIS.
So if we're looking at that, I want to go back to something you said that this group of Americans they've found to be plaintiffs who said they felt something. I mean, since when is the basis of law somebody's feelings? I mean, that strikes me as totally unsupportable legally.
Right. I mean, it's not. In the Establishment Clause, there can be stigmatic injury inflicted on a religion, and that gives you standing in a way that it wouldn't in other areas of the law. But it's much more specific than just, I feel deeply saddened by the exclusion of people from these Muslim countries. I think it makes me feel like a second-class citizen. It has to be a lot more particular than that. But anyway, the Establishment Clause, in my view, and the court did not disagree with this. Basically, it doesn't apply in foreign policy.
And that's a key point here. So this was made at the Supreme Court level. So is this set precedent going forward? And how broad was this decision, or was it very narrow?
Well, it was broad in the sense that it didn't hold anything. It didn't say what level of review was supposed to be given here, except that it said, we will not give any review higher than rational basis. Did the president have a rational basis for doing this? And it found that he did. But it didn't even say, it assumed without deciding that it even had the power to review his decision here.
So we're talking with Chris Hajec. He's the director of litigation, Immigration Reform Law Institute, about defending the president's orders regarding immigration. I heard a lot of talk, Chris, about the president's words during the campaign, and I heard judges using those as some sort of a legal basis, which seemed ridiculous to me. He was a private citizen. He's entitled to make whatever comments he wants. So how could that be a legal basis for whether or not the president has a right under the Constitution to make a decision regarding immigration?
Yeah, maybe in some conceivable circumstances it could be, but I mean, and no one really tried to defend what Trump had said, but there's a recent other case where he's being sued for putting a citizenship question on the census, and they say that that's motivated by anti-Mexican animus, and they quote him criticizing Mexican criminals. He criticizes categories of Mexican criminals, and he criticizes the Mexican government, and that somehow makes him have animus in general against Mexicans. But it doesn't. I mean, and I don't think he has such animus.
This is fascinating to me because the census is a very important document, and I think it's been misused at times. But it seems to me that part of the understanding of representation in the United States Congress, which is determined by the census, we don't, people who are law-abiding citizens, do not want people counted for representation who are not citizens. So the fact that that question isn't there and hasn't been there, maybe it's been there in the past, but hasn't been there in the recent past, is disturbing to me.
And the census is all about gathering information. It's totally legitimate information. What their worry is that illegal aliens won't answer the census because they'll be afraid to answer that question. And the question arises whether it's within the president's power or Congress's power either to count or not to count illegal aliens in the census to begin with, because the number goes into the apportionment of representatives and
that's right,
the number of electoral votes the state has. And it would give states a perverse incentive to try to keep as many illegal aliens in their state as they can so they get more representation in Washington.
So, Chris, what is the law, at least what has been settled previously regarding the president's ability to determine questions on the census? Has that case come up before?
It's come up over the years. The president and the Secretary of Commerce have extremely broad discretion in deciding what goes on the census.
So, given that, what is the timeline for the next census, and how does this go forward? In other words, is there a concern that there's going to be one of these activist judges coming in and putting a halt, and then it's too late because the timeline goes by and the census is sent out without the question on it?
That has not happened. It's early on we were wondering whether they would ask for a preliminary injunction and try to halt all planning and preparation, but that would be so unfair. Before you decide the merits of the case, you prevent him even from preparing to include the question.
Okay, so what's the timeline here? What could we anticipate going forward with the census itself? Because I'm not sure, is that a 2020 census, or when is that supposed to be sent out?
It's the 2020 census, and certain things have to happen at certain dates in 2019.
Okay, so we're not out of the woods yet as far as this legal case goes?
No, we're not. It could go and be decided against the Secretary and the President.
Okay, and finally, Chris, I wanted to ask you about something you brought up early on regarding lawsuits and choosing judges and districts. And we know that the President is making a substantive effort to change the constitution of the courts, which is great, pardon the pun. But how is it that people can just go around and shop for liberal judges? I've never understood that.
Well, you bring a lawsuit, you find a plaintiff who has standing or you think has standing in the court you want to be in, so you go and you sue there, and I guess you hope you get the right judge, or maybe there is some technique they have that I don't know of to select the judge you want.
It seems to work very often in their favor.
It does.
It certainly does. All right. Chris Hajec, it's a fascinating subject. If people want to get more information about the work that you do at the Immigration Reform Law Institute, would you tell us how they can find you?
Yes, we're at IRLI.org.
It's great. I'm so glad that you stood up to protect the President in his lawful orders and in his attempts to protect us from these problems. And fascinating conversation today. Chris Hajec, thanks for joining us on The Schilling Show.
Thank you.